So Fatima Hussein's the treasury reporter at the Associated Press, and we met because I was doing a fellowship with Howard University, and and I was learning about how to teach investigative journalism, and I ran into Fatima while she was sitting there working in the newsroom, and just very inviting. So I appreciate you even asking me to do this. It was a brief encounter, and she responded, and so we had the wonderful opportunity of such a great organization that she works for, and then also to look at someone who has to view reporting of a federal agency or a federal part of the government, which is very unique. Is different look than some of the reporters that we'll talk to later in the semester who do a local point of view. So with that said, I here's how we'll do this. We'll start. Sorry, people are still coming in, Fatima. So we'll start. What we'll start with is with I would like to have each of you briefly introduce yourselves, and I'll call on your name as just I see it. And if you could just say your name, your major, and your year. And if you are available to do so, I'm asking that you come off mute. So why don't we start with Roderick? Yes, I see Mildred. Can you hear us, Roderick? Okay. So we'll start with Kyra. If you want to say your name, your major, and your year.
Hi, my name is Kyra Newsome. I'm a senior comparative women's studies major with a concentration in journalism from Memphis.
Mhm. Wonderful. And Spelman, right? You said?
Oh, yes, and I'm from Spelman.
Mhm. And then next on here is Elijah.
Good afternoon. My name is Elijah Pinckney. I'm a junior sports journalism major, business administration minor from Prince George's County, Maryland, attending Morehouse College.
Perfect. And then we have Elijah Harris.
Hello, everyone. Sorry about that. My name is Elijah Harris. I'm a senior communications major, the minor in sports journalism from Naperville, Illinois.
Beautiful. And Aaron Watts.
Hello, my name is Aaron Watts. I'm a senior journalism major from Ellicott City, Maryland.
Beautiful. And then Broderick.
Hello, my name is Broderick Houston. I'm a junior sports journalism major from Dallas, Texas.
Perfect. And make sure you mute afterwards.
I can go next. I'm sorry, my mute button was working weird.
Oh, no worries. Go ahead, Roderick.
Hi, my name is Roderick Brown. I'm a senior communication major from Waldorf, Maryland.
And then we have Emmanuel.
Good afternoon. My name is Emmanuel Lee. I'm a junior journalism major from North Jersey.
Jersey. Joshua.
Hi, my name is Joshua Vaughn. I'm a senior political science major, sports journalism minor from Chicago, and I attend Morehouse.
And Jermaine.
Hello, my name is Jermaine Beckett Jr. I'm a sophomore journalism major, business minor from Virginia Beach, Virginia.
Thank you. And Kyla.
Hello, my name is Kyla Leslie. I'm a senior sociology major, art history minor from Los Angeles, California, and I go to Spelman.
Beautiful. And then it says, I saw your note, Meldrick. Are you still having trouble with mute?
No, I think I'm good now.
Okay, wonderful. Introduce yourself, please.
My name is Mildred Glenn. I'm a senior sports journalism major from Miami Gardens, Florida, and I go to Morehouse.
Wonderful. So did I get everyone? It kind of switches order. Okay, great. And then Fatima, why don't you introduce yourself just briefly?
Sure. Yeah. Hi. I'm Fatima Hussein. I'm from Jacksonville, Florida, and there are a lot of Marylanders in this class, so that's really great. Go there pretty often. Yeah, I cover the Treasury Department for the Associated Press. How deep do you want me to
You can keep
to
it.
go?
We'll go deep. I hope you go deep. Why don't you start by telling us how long have you been at the Associated Press?
I've been at the Associated Press in December. It'll be 3 years exactly.
Mhm. And,
Um,
and tell us a little bit what that's like day to day.
okay, day to day, it's very different. The Treasury Department, I think it's an agency you probably don't normally think about. The IRS is within the Treasury Department. Treasury also is responsible for sort of like anything having to do with the government and money and how money is spent. So on some days, I could just be looking at lots of spreadsheets to talk about, what the deficit looks like, because that's something that we hear about a lot from lawmakers and how they want to attack the deficit. But then also because I work so close to the White House, I oftentimes will be assigned covering the White House or initiatives coming out of the White House that relate to the Treasury Department. So I'm mostly on Treasury, but also a bit on the White House as well.
And how does that feel going back and forth at times? So what kind of education do you have, and how did you acquire the skill set to be able to talk about those type of big agencies?
Okay, so I did not take the traditional journalism route. I never knew a journalist growing up. I didn't really know what that was. So I went to community college at FCCJ in Jacksonville, and then I finished my undergrad at University of North Florida. And then after that, I went to law school because I figured that would be a good path to take. I didn't really know what I wanted to do for the longest time. And I went to Florida Coastal. And after law school or in law school, I joined the newspaper. I think a lot of people will join law review, but I wanted to do newspaper writing because it just seemed like an interesting thing to do. And from there, after law school, after I graduated, I started working at the Daytona Beach News Journal, which is like a small newspaper in Florida. It's kind of unusual to do that instead of doing internships, but I also couldn't really afford to do an internship. So I just tried to get a job at a really I applied to so many jobs. I think I applied to like 700 jobs. I started a Gmail account and I finally got an offer at the Daytona Beach News Journal, and I worked there for 3 years and 9 months, and then I got laid off. So that's a very common experience in the news business.
It is.
And then immediately after, I got a job at the Cincinnati Enquirer, where I sort of kind of kept moving up from like newspaper to newspaper. And at Daytona Beach News Journal, I covered business, like I was like a GA business reporter or general assignment reporter, covering business primarily. Then I moved to Cincinnati Enquirer, where I covered labor, like labor rights. I had never really heard about labor in Florida because it's a right to work state. So it was sort of like lots of just learning about what the world is as a journalist. And then after that, I worked at the Indianapolis Star. I kind of also something that is kind of typical is moving around a lot. When you try to get to your dream job, it does require lots of moves to places like Ohio and Indiana, which were places I'd never expected ever moving to. And then finally, I decided I really, really want to be in Washington, D.C. So I got a job at Bloomberg Law covering legal issues like worker safety and, kind of like relating to my labor reporting and also my business reporting. And then finally, after about 4 years at Bloomberg Law, I moved over to the AP, and now I'm in this job. So it's taken like 12 years, I think, to get here.
Is this the only job you've had at the AP, or have you had other focuses?
I've had just this job, but with the election coming up, a lot of newsrooms will kind of change. So you can pick what you want to do. That's sort of the conversation I'm having with my editors now. Like they're saying, you cover Treasury. If you like it, keep doing it. If you want to do something else, you can create your own job because depending on who's elected, things will look very different in our newsroom.
Yeah.
So
What
who knows
attract
where
what attracted you to newspaper? Like you said, newspapers were interesting versus, being a journalist on audio or podcasting or television. What attracted you to that?
I think it's just what I knew. At the time, I'm very old in the sense that podcasting wasn't really a thing when I first started. I think I started at the Daytona Beach News Journal in like 2012. So podcasting wasn't very prevalent, and TV reporting wasn't something I was really interested in because I wanted to do more in-depth reporting. I like doing research. I think that's what makes me a different reporter than other kinds of reporters. I think like if I could find my niche or the thing that could sell me to other news organizations, it's that I have this law degree. I can do a lot of research, and I can do more than just a superficial story. Maybe I I have like discriminated against TV reporters in the sense that I felt like maybe they didn't do as deep dive reporting, but they do. I just chose to do newspaper.
That and they don't have much time. They have to be on the air by 6 o'clock.
Yeah, and they have to look nice all the time. And
Yeah.
I like to sit and do journalism in my pajamas.
Yeah.
Most of the time I
Yeah.
do.
You can't do your live shot in pajamas.
No, yeah, you have to look nice.
Well, what kind of, you touched on this a little bit, talking about how you um, have this law degree and you like research, but what are some of the skills that you would recommend for all of us to think about if we're considering being a reporter, whether that's local or national or even international?
Skills that I'm still working on are speed and accuracy in reporting, which requires a sense of confidence about your knowledge. So, for instance, let's say the Teamsters decide not to endorse Kamala Harris for president. That's the news. So then you want to be able to not only get, that fact out, ensuring that it's verified, but then you want to add some context to the news itself because you'll have your first headline, the editors will put it on the internet or put it on the wire. Then you'll want to start writing a story, and your story will be maybe 4 or 5 lines. Hopefully, you've prepared that story. Pre-writing is the most beautiful thing you could ever do. Just pre-write as much as you possibly can.
And
Anything
describe
that
to us
you
what that means, pre-writing.
pre-writing is like, I know that on this day, this thing is going to happen as a reporter. And maybe it's embargoed, so only I know the information. I'm going to write that story ahead of time so that when it actually happens, I'm not scrambling to write it. So that way you're fast, or you look really fast, but if you're actually quite slow, it's a way to kind of make up for being a slow writer. I'm a very slow writer, but I try to be fast as possible when I can. And I guess when I meant like confidence in reporting, it's also that when you are sort of under super high pressure to get a story out and you're competing with a million other outlets, what you can rely on is your prior knowledge after having like read about this stuff and covering it. So when the reporters were writing about the Teamsters not endorsing Kamala Harris for president, I could use my prior labor knowledge to say, here's what the Teamsters, like, here's the context behind that decision. Here are a bunch of things that the Teamsters and the Biden administration had done before. And I could just write that out without even looking at notes. When you can do your reporting without even looking at your notes, then you're going to be faster.
And I'm curious as to what you like about journalism. And then what would you want to mention to maybe your 20-year-old self to consider, like, oh, this part you might want to consider is not the greatest thing. And I just want to give you fair warning. What do you like and what do you don't like about the field?
I like that every day is very different, and I'm always meeting really interesting people. Yesterday, I was at the Capitol Hill Club, which is a Republican establishment I never thought I would ever step foot in. And I met with a crypto investor, and he was talking about like trying to explain to me what crypto is, and I found myself there thinking like this is a strange place to be. Or I've ridden on Air Force One and Air Force Two a couple of times, Air Force One a lot more, and that's something that I feel like you can't really pay for. Like you have to be in that position in order to do that. I really like also writing stories that make people that make change or enlighten people in a way that, oh, I'd never thought about that. Or, oh, I helped an old lady who, when I wrote a story about a time that my phone was hacked, and a couple of like elderly people messaged me to say, your story really helped me because somebody reached out to try to hack my phone. And sometimes there are stories that are impactful, but not all of them are. And I think that's the thing that I don't like about journalism is sometimes you feel like a stenographer and that you're not really writing things that make a difference. Like not all of your stories are going to make a difference, and that can be a little disheartening.
It's interesting you said that. It does feel good when people reach. I wrote a piece for Harvard Business Review making the case against ageism and how it dilutes your productivity and your company culture and all of that. And I started off with my own experience of ageism, but it was helping people. It was bad. It was basically those who were older in the newsroom and those who were younger in the newsroom couldn't connect because they couldn't get past this thing called age. And I had a lot of people reach out about that. I really appreciate you being honest with that and sharing that story and sharing effectively what they felt with some of their story as well. So I really want to ask you about how do you stand out to get that reporter job, right? So it feels seamless when somebody shares their story, like, oh, I was I graduated and then I went to law school and then I went to Florida and then up to Cincinnati. It feels fluid, but you had to do something to stand out and especially when you said that you didn't take a traditional path. So what would be a recommendation for students that you would say, here's how if I want to be a reporter or an editor or those things, how do I stand out?
Okay. I thought about this because you did send me a couple questions ahead of time. Number one is writing as clearly as you possibly can in your cover letter and make your resume not like your resume has to be super clear and your cover letter have to be ultra clear because these hiring people, and I've had the chance to be part of hiring panels, which is really, I never thought I'd be doing that, but it's when you get hundreds of them, you kind of like toss out the ones that have any sort of confusion. Like if it's confusing, I'm not even going to read it. But if it's just ultra clear, that's really, really helpful. That's like more than helpful. And sometimes I don't know if you guys have worked on your resumes or you have really great ones or you have like great resume coaches or something. I never had any of that, but if you just kind of like read it and if it looks clear, that in itself will get you somewhere. And then when it comes to if you get the interview at a news organization, if you ask questions, ask good questions. And I think that's just beyond like with the interview process or trying to get a job, but just asking everybody lots of questions.
Yes.
That it's like it's on dates, it's really helpful. On like in life, it's really helpful. It's like getting to know the people that are closest to you and asking questions, I think is incredibly imperative if you want to be a journalist, I think. And I'm not good at it, but I try to do that.
It's funny you say that because the book we just finished reading is called Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. And it's that very premise of being able to understand more and to have a more in-depth way of viewing something, to be able to view something different than your own initial thoughts, and to be able to come into all based on to come in to explore, discover, and to come into something with an open mind just by using the tool of question. So you would think I paid you $5 to say that.
No, you didn't pay me, but it is helpful, especially like I'm coming from business reporting. It seems like a lot of the students are really interested in sports reporting, and that still applies because if you interview any athlete or person or manager you're interviewing, and if you get those really good questions in, you might get an answer that you can't get, like nobody else got from them, and that will make you a really valuable reporter and somebody that more people will want to be interviewed by you because you ask those really good questions.
Absolutely. And you'd be surprised at how much people, especially if you're asking about themselves, sometimes people will open up. It's just unless they're being accused of something.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about tools and technology, which may feel like a like where that question come from, but just want to get a sense of what you're required to use as a journalist today, what that looks like. I'll be very transparent. I have our class on Slack because to me it just feels like a saying you've never seen Slack is like saying you've never seen Outlook email. But what are some of the things that you use in your newsroom day to day, or even to report?
So we use Slack in our newsroom. We use Zoom for our meetings. We also, just for like communication, we also use Otter, although now we don't use it because it can be hacked. Like we found that it can be hacked. Otter is a transcription service. So let's say you and I are talking and I have my phone with the app open recording. It'll just show the transcript of you, what you're saying, and then I can copy paste your quote into a story later on. But now that it's been banned by the AP, we use a different service called Trint, which is not as good, and I don't like to use it. But transcription services are really helpful when you're interviewing people. The problem is sometimes that maybe if you're interviewing somebody and it's kind of a sensitive issue, maybe you don't want your phone kind of like transcribing, but it just depends. Like that's really case by case, but in general, we use Otter. And then for, I mean, computers, and I guess also we use, I'm trying to get into TikTok. I have a TikTok account. I don't post anything. I've done a couple of TikTok videos for AP. And as far as other technology, we have our like, the actual program where we put our stories in for the wire. And yeah, then depending on what other thing I'm working on, there's other technologies, but we also have like Pacer and Westlaw, LexisNexis for research. But yeah, a lot of my work is just Google and the telephone and calling people.
Yeah, LexisNexis is a great resource. It's expensive, so you're lucky to be in a newsroom that's willing to subscribe for that. You all might want to think about looking up LexisNexis and learning a little bit more about that as well. So I have two more questions for you. One is that, and I want to ask this question because students have asked this in the past, and I just love hearing the transparency of journalists talk about that. But they've mentioned imposter syndrome, just the idea that even if you are qualified, usually people who are exceptionally qualified feel like they don't belong in the or deserve the position, or that they're not good at what they do, even when they're high performers. It's just it feels like you're an imposter. Have you ever dealt with that? And if so, how do you overcome it?
Absolutely. And that can come in a lot of different ways because oftentimes you'll be the only person who looks like you in the room. More often than not, that will be the case. Even if you have a supportive, like if you're lucky enough to have a supportive editor, and I thankfully now after 12 years have a supportive editor, they still might not completely understand they might not understand you and where you're coming from or where the imposter syndrome comes from. And also, even when you do build up the confidence and you're like, I'm not an imposter, I deserve to be here, there will be people around you who will try to diminish you or for whatever reason and whatever they're going through will try to make you feel like you don't belong. This is where I think, and this is maybe not helpful, this is what's worked for me, is one, having a person who is sort of like an informal mentor in the building who you can go to kind of like run scenarios off of. Like, this thing happened, am I crazy? Or what happened here? That is helpful to just get that guidance and just to hear from somebody the validation that like, no, you're not crazy. This person is just terrible to work with, or this person is just trying to diminish you because they have this lack of confidence in themselves, which is usually why people do that. But then also, I think it's really important to have a support system outside of journalism where a lot of times we connect our identities with our jobs. I think after school, everybody's probably going to do that to some extent. And if you have like really good friends and family who are your people that after work, like even if work is terrible, you can go to so that you realize that this is just an environment that you go in and out of and you check in and out and whatever issues those people have is theirs. That has been really helpful to me to have a good friend group and family group that when I do feel like an imposter, and it will probably exist forever, who knows? I at least have my friends and family that I go to and they don't make me feel that way.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You're the second journalist in probably a couple of weeks that has made that recommendation to ensure that all your friends and then your family and your peeps, your network isn't all journalists. And it's easy to do. Journalists do that a lot. It's easy to. You're right about that. It's easy to marry a journalist, and your friends are journalists, and the people that everybody you link in with is a journalist.
That's how you become an elitist, I think.
Yeah.
That's probably the path there.
Yeah, it's a great way to be in an echo chamber and not hear what other people are really feeling and thinking as well. So I did not put this on the list. I had one question, and this comes from several students have talked to me about this semester, but writer's block, right? I see a topic I really care about. I want to dive in, but I'm stuck. How do you overcome writer's block?
I have like block answering that question. I'm dealing with that right now with the story where they want me to write about Pennsylvania. It's the election. Also, I cover the elections too because now it's the election year. So, and the AP is all about elections. So that's what they have me on. And the editor gave me a premise. I went to Pennsylvania. I got my quotes. I came back. I went to State College and Pittsburgh, which is a very long drive. I did a lot of reporting. I came back. My editor was like, I think actually the story should be about blank. Rewrite the whole thing. Okay. Rewriting is very unpleasant, but it must be done sometimes. And I restarted the story. I'm not going to go back, but I have to start with a new page. And I have I have the top of the story, but I don't have the middle. I don't have the end. I don't really know where I'm going with the story. I think that's when, and the way that I tried to combat it yesterday was I went to the editor again and I said, I'm not clear about what you want. Can we talk out what I have and where I should be going? I think when you have writer's block, it might be because you don't know what the story's about, or you don't know where you want it to go, or you don't know why people should care. And after we talked about it, and he explained, like, when we look at the numbers, this one county in Pennsylvania is going to be the decisive county in the election. Whatever happens there could determine everything. And so maybe we should start with that. And that kind of helped me understand the gravity of the story, and it gave me a little bit extra. But yeah, writer's block is very unpleasant, and it's not fun.
Yeah,
Don't
well, I like that approach because as an editor, I've had a lot of reporters do that, come up and say, "Can we talk through this?"
Mhm.
And I think that's a great message in that number one, especially if you have a good editor, you're in a great newsroom, you don't have to do this alone. So you don't have to think through this alone or frame this by yourself. That two minds are better than one, and they can people will just see things in a way that you don't see it that can help you get going. That and a lovely outline. I love to outline things before I even get started. So
Mhm.
I do try to, even if it's on just a piece of paper, I have some type of roadmap that I can even talk to someone about. So I think that's a wonderful advice. And so hopefully that will help some of you who have come to me and said that you struggle with writer's block. So we only have about a little over 15 minutes left of the class, and I want to ensure that you all get an opportunity to ask questions. So I'll try to call on as many as I can at the end of the class. And I'm just going to go again, and as I see an order on my screen, I want to start with our Spelmanites though, with just one question. And then if we have time, we'll circle back to anyone's second question. But why don't we start with Kyra? And can you share a question that you thought about for Fatima?
Okay, my question is like very specific to me is like I'm just now getting into journalism this past semester. Something I struggle with like when I'm writing is like I feel like it takes me like I guess too long to write a story. So like how do you like I guess get better at writing your stories more quickly
Like
or under like a
writing,
time constraint?
okay, like time constraint. I would think there's nothing wrong with you for taking a long time to write a story. That's where, if you can pre-write as much as possible, you'll end up having a much better story than someone who took 5 minutes to just quickly put it together. Um, Pre-writing will save your life every single time. And just like whatever you know ahead of time, even if it's just getting the skeleton of like your name and like the template, if you can just get that prepared, then if you know something is going to happen, you can immediately just like write the one sentence. And that's the one thing you have to be fast at. The more preparation you do, the better. So you look a lot faster than you feel like you actually are. And also, I would say not everybody has to be the fastest writer in the entire world. Like, there's definitely currency in being able to be this like breaking news reporter, but some of the best writers in the world are not fast. They're not like when I think of really amazing writers, they weren't newspaper people, and they weren't just these ultra fast robots. But to be ultra fast, more preparation is good.
That's great. Great question, Kyra. Kyla, would you like to come off mute and ask a question?
Yes, I would like to ask a question. With my experience with a lot of journalists and having conversations with them, they eventually begin to write a book. So I wanted to know if you have goals of writing a book or have thought of goals of writing books.
Great question.
That's a great question. I recently went to a book party for a friend at the AP who wrote a book about um, several miscarriages that she had, and it's called "I'm Sorry for My Loss," and she wrote it because of that. And I think if I wrote something, it might be fiction because I'm kind of tired of writing nonfiction. I'd like to write stuff about kind of how I grew up and where I grew up and the experiences that I've had, but from a very fictitious lens. I don't know if I would be interested in writing um, anything about what I report on.
That's a great question. Both are great questions. Broderick, you're next on my list.
Um, I guess my question is, what was your favorite story that you wrote?
My favorite story I've ever written was about a man named Butch Lewis who reached out to me initially with like not hate mail, but it was just like this like mean old man message. And I have a practice of when somebody's like mean, but not like dangerously mean, but just like they're just like, you don't know what you're talking about. I'll reach out to that person to say, like, here's how I came to my reporting, da da da. I met him, like we decided to meet. This is when I lived in Cincinnati. And then he told me about how his pension was gonna get cut. And um, I met his wife, and I met all of these old retired Teamsters, and I followed them to Washington when they were like protesting their pensions getting cut. And in the middle of my reporting, Butch Lewis died, and I wrote his obituary. And his wife kind of like took the mantle for these retired Teamsters. And then they lobbied and lobbied and lobbied Congress, and then eventually the Butch Lewis Act was passed into law with the Inflation Reduction, no, ARP, the American Rescue Plan. And I remember meeting Butch Lewis as this like old man who was just like complaining about my reporting, and it turned out that he became this like figure in this movement that I had no idea. And I think to this day that's like my favorite story. And that's also a lesson in like when people are mean to you in their like weird emails, you should just respond and ask them for coffee, and sometimes they'll meet with you.
I agree with that advice. I've actually people who have reached out to me, pretty much all of them, I have reached back out, and I have found that people then actually want to have good discourse.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's the vast majority of people, even if at first they were yelling at you.
And yeah, sometimes if they're scary or they say hateful things, those are you block that.
Yeah.
Just block the block.
Yeah, yeah, the power of that. So Jermaine, you're next on my list.
I was wondering, like, how was the workspace in like the news industry? Like, are you in like an exact classroom, or like can you just type from home, or like do you have to stay in the same bubble with the same journalists that you're like working with?
Do you mean like in the like what does the newsroom look like, or is it sort of
Yes, like the newsroom. I should have been more specific. I'm sorry,
are
but
you
yeah,
okay?
like the
Okay, the newsroom is people love and hate the newsroom because you're sitting there trying to write something, and then people are next to you having conversations about a story, and they're really loud, or sometimes they'll be debating. Like people will have very different opinions about the world and sitting there yelling at each other, and you're like trying to type, and then you're getting a phone call, and then oh yeah, you owe somebody something that you owed them a week ago and you forgot about it, and it's a lot of chaos, but you can also find a little tiny room somewhere, like a little booth to talk. But also the workspace is like one day I'm at Treasury, one day I'm at the White House, one day I'm traveling with Janet Yellen, or one day sometimes every day looks different, but the newsroom itself is kind of a chaos place.
Yeah. And I wonder, just to follow up on that, has that changed since the pandemic, the feel of it?
No, it's the same.
Yeah.
It's the same. It's
Okay.
loud.
So next on my list, I have Ian.
Hi. Thank
Hi.
you so much for coming in to talk to us today. Um, I guess my big question was I was also a very recent sorry, a second. I was walking out of Gloucester Hall. But I'm also a very recent journalism major. I was an English major for a while before I made the transition to becoming a journalism major. And I think the biggest adjustment has been definitely like my colleague was saying earlier today, just switching over from having maybe like a couple of weeks like to write an essay or write a story to suddenly having to turn a story around maybe in like 3 to 4 days. And I feel like sometimes like with me and with my writing, it's like especially making that transition over from English to journalism, it's been that constant battle of like trying to make sure that quality stays consistent under those, that's those time constraints. And I was just wondering, like, as you've written your stories and as you've kind of dealt with those time constraints, have you ever kind of like been met with that same situation where you felt like it was an adjustment to kind of like work with that? And if so, how did you kind of just kind of learn how to adjust to that and how to move forward and really be able to deliver a quality story in a smaller amount of time that you might be working with?
I love that you were an English major. I was an English major. I graduated as an English major. I didn't do journalism. Um, and you're right that there's like a much longer period of time where you can write your articles or papers. I think this is where I'll again say pre-writing is helpful because I'll never feel like a story is perfect if I only have 15 to 20 minutes to write it. And you do, with practice, get better at being faster. In response to Kyra's question about like how do you get faster, I think if you just keep doing it over and over, you do just naturally get a bit faster. But for ensuring the quality of a story, um, this is where I think it is helpful to be a little bit of an expert in everything. So, like having a curiosity about, let's say you're writing about Social Security, and like you've just been assigned a story about Social Security, and you're like, I don't know anything about this. If you knew just a little bit, then the quality of your story would be a little bit easier or better. So it's sort of like be curious about everything. Like, even though you want to write about, let's say, sports, if you only read sports reporting, your reporting is only, it's going to be limited because you've only focused on one kind of thing. But if you like really want to be a sports reporter, but then like, I don't know, you read a book about, because I mentioned miscarriages, you read a book about miscarriages or something, it just gives you a more like voluminous look at the world, or like a better way of looking at the world. Because let's say you're a sports reporter and an athlete is like, I had a miscarriage and this is affecting my ability to do such and such. You've read this book about miscarriages and now you have this understanding, like the world is very interconnected. So if you limit yourself in reading about one kind of thing, you're not gonna be the best reporter you can be. So I guess it's just like be curious about the world.
No, that actually really helps because that was one of the things that I feel like I'm just starting to really understand. Because especially I know with our last assignment, I had to write an article, and it was focused on like the arts and entertainment section, but it had a lot of like political intersectionality as well. Like I was also talking kind of about like what this artist statement on the Harris campaign like was also meant like for like Gen Z voters kind of like going forward. And I remember like as I was writing it, it was like, okay, I could only if I only were to write about it from the perspective of like the arts and entertainment side, then I'm not really gonna have that much to write about. And it was like the second that I started like thinking of it as kind of being like, okay, like what does that broader statement have to do with everything else that's kind of going on, like in the context of the world? It was kind of like it opened up a lot more, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
there's like
I
different
definitely
angles.
exactly. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
It's interesting because some reporters that I've worked with have done that on purpose, like push themselves. Like they will be a, maybe they will be a political reporter and they'll come over to me and I was the features editor and say, I want to write a feature. Like I'm not used to that I don't normally do that. And I want to challenge myself to write a really quality feature. And we would work on that story together. So, look for those opportunities as well. I'll also say much of the people that journalists I have worked with have been English majors who can tell a story. They can break down storylines and understand characters and all these things. And it makes they have become really good features reporters as well. So you have a skill set there that the fact that you were an English major and now you get to transition that into to real life events, places, and spaces that you can talk about. Joshua, what if you could come off mute and share a question?
I've just been thinking of a good question this entire time. Um,
There are no bad questions. It's just
I
whatever's
guess
in your mind.
yeah, I guess I could ask a question. So, I'm a political science major with the intention of going to law school, and kind of the reason why I picked up a sports journalism or a journalism minor is to improve like my ability to like write um articles or short like basically writing samples, being able to get information compacted in a smaller way rather than like an essay format. Can you like elaborate on many benefits that also come with like being a good journalist rather than kind of like being good at storytelling, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I immediately think of spreadsheets and being able to read spreadsheets in a way that a lot of reporters can't. Um, I feel like you're asking about the reporting itself as opposed to the writing. Like writing is one task that's very difficult, but the actual gathering of information, um, that can be difficult also if your newsroom doesn't have access to a lot of tools like we had mentioned LexisNexis and Pacer, which are expensive and some newsrooms don't have, or the Bloomberg Terminal, which is its own thing, which a lot of places can't afford anymore because it's like I think a $35,000 subscription for each newsroom. So then you have to be really good at finding public databases that do exist for your journalism. So for instance, if you're writing about, the city manager had been misusing funds or something, or bought a house with such and such, if you can figure out how to, using free databases, like research those things, that is that is not easy in terms of like telling a story about data, which is that's its own thing, and it's very difficult, and I'm still also trying to learn that. One of my favorite editors told me, and I still try to do this to this day. He said a good business or numbers story should have as few actual numbers in it as possible to make it interesting to readers. Because if you have like, you know, 55% of men voted for such and such, and 45% of women voted for such and such in this county, which 3 years ago, 50% of men voted for, like it just becomes like too numbers heavy. So I would argue that when you're doing a lot of this like data heavy reporting, you don't want to inundate people or like overwhelm them with all of that information. Sometimes having that smart information, if it's not accessible to people, it's not actually that smart. It's better to make it as like simple as humanly possible.
I couldn't agree with that more. To make it plain, that's what we're always talking about here.
Yeah.
Well, Fatima, it is 12:59, and so I want to ensure that we get the opportunity to thank you for visiting. I mean, that was a lot of questions, and you asked it fast. I see Emmanuel. If you have a question, if you could make it brief, if you want to come off mute.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Ms. Smith and Ms. Hussein. Ms. Fatima, I appreciate you. I just wanted to ask real quick about your writing style, and if you have a particular writing style, how it's matured, developed over the course of your career. If you could speak on that just for a quick second.
That's a great question. Um, I like to think that my writing style is not super conventional in the sense that I don't really adhere to past tense and present tense when I write in my stories. Like in one moment we're in past tense, in another moment we're in present tense. And not very often do editors catch that because they're so busy. But I do try to like, if I'm giving you a sense of place, maybe it's in the past, but then I'm also putting you there now. And I think maybe your professor doesn't like that, but I think that's something. But then also, I try for my writing style with business reporting to be less about business and actually more about like when I wrote about Social Security and the cost of living increase that happens every year. And I wrote a story about a lot of uh, grandkids who are taken care of by their grandparents and how it's actually like Social Security is also a kids program more than it is just an old age program. And it was a story about how grandparents take care of their grandkids. So it could have easily just been a story that's like Social Security, the cost of living increase has been increased by such and such this year. But instead, I tried to make it like a people story. And I try to make my writings, I try to have a writing style, but I don't always have one. Sometimes it's just writing something quick.
I think making your story people stories, it just makes people feel like seen and relatable, or it makes it so that you can understand it. So I appreciate that technique and that point of view. And I actually don't have an opinion about going back and forth between present and past tense, as long as it's effective writing. I see Elijah have your hand up if you want to ask a question briefly.
Yes, I did. Thank you so much for all the insight you have given us for the past hour. It's greatly appreciated. I've thank you. I wanted to ask. You said you emphasize pre-writing a lot, and I wanted to just ask, what was the most difficult story you have written, and then how long did it take for you to complete that story, combined with like writing it before you published it, and then with the pre-writing?
If I don't remember, it's because I blacked out because it sucks.
I understand. I understand.
I guess any story that comes from a really enormous spreadsheet, um, those are, I mean, those are just hard because it's like I have to like hit my brain to understand what is what, and like how certain numbers go into context with others. But maybe I would say the Butch Lewis story because as much as it's my favorite, it was really hard. And there were moments where I would go to these like Teamster meetings and these old guys were like threatening violence to each other. And I just felt like this seems tense and like I don't want to get injured at this thing, but then it's important to be there and people are yelling at me. And yeah, I think maybe Butch Lewis, yeah, it's hard. It's the hardest, but also my favorite.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And I think I see one more hand is Aaron, if you want to come off mute.
Hi, Miss Fatima. Thanks again for your time. My question was, so I recently became a journalism major after not making it into the cinema, television, and emerging media studies program. Having come off the heels of that program, I took an interest in doing photojournalism, possibly being a cameraman or an editor for like broadcast news. But I noticed that a lot of people in the Maroon Tiger, when I'm interacting with them, they're not only are they also good writers, but they also are able to take good shots. Meanwhile, I, in the meantime, are am still learning about my camera and how to take good shots, and the quality of my writing has never been my strong suit. So my question is, it's basically two parts. Do you know anyone who, like, have you ever heard of someone who is exclusively a photojournalist? And if they are, how do they stick out? How do they stick out with that as their role?
I feel like you're in a position where the world is your oyster. Like you're trying different things, and that's a really good place to be in the sense that you're not limiting yourself and you're trying out different things. I know a lot of photojournalists at the AP and local newspapers, and a lot of people sort of fell into it like it wasn't the thing that they had always imagined they were going to do. I fell into journalism. It's not something I ever thought. I thought I was going to be a dentist. I didn't know what I was going to do for the longest time. Um, I feel like it's good that you're trying these different things, and it's also okay to not know exactly what your career is going to look like in 10 years, 5 years, 3 years. that's okay. The photojournalists I know, to answer your question, I know quite a lot of them, and um, they do it exclusively as their job. And the better you are, the more money you get from it. And I know a lot of, and I work with a lot of freelancers who photo is not their primary job. It's something that they do maybe on the side, and they do other things. Like they have several different things that they do. Of all the freelancers I know, it's mostly photographers. I don't know a lot of freelance writers. I know that they exist. I know some of them, but there are a lot of freelance photographers. So even if it's something that you maybe don't want to do full time, it is an option for something that maybe you want to do on the side, or if you want to live in a specific area, like if you don't live in New York or DC, um, or I guess Atlanta has CNN, so you can always try CNN. But uh, there are a lot of different options. I would love to connect with you and see where you go, because you do have the fact that you're trying all these different things like cinema and photo and writing. It's like your future is bright. Maybe you don't know what it is right now, but it's very obvious that it is.
Oh, it's wonderful. I will say, just as a quick aside before we wrap up, but Aaron, I was watching on a PBS the other night, a story. It was maybe a 2 hour special about the busing in the 70s in Boston, which essentially was a story about race and segregated communities. And it was interesting because the guy, a lawyer who had nothing to do with any of this stuff, but it was a lawyer who happened to be going to the courthouse where there were a group of white people who were protesting and why are you busing black kids over to our neighborhoods? And he was just walking into the courthouse to do day's business, and he was a black man in a suit with glasses, and a white man attacked him, but he didn't just attack him, he attacked him with an American flag, which is just ironic because this is a symbol of freedom and all of these things that we think about when we think of America being, and it's that symbol is being used to attack a black man. That picture, that photo, it happened to be someone who was there to cover the event, the protest, who snapped that picture of a black man being attacked by a white man of the symbol of the American flag, and it won a Pulitzer Prize, right? And so that was not a story that was like written. It was that what won the Pulitzer Prize wasn't the written story. It was the photography that this man captured that at the protest at the courthouse in the 70s. So I say all that to say is that work is extremely valuable. So if that's your skill set and you want to lean into it, you can make a difference and deliver messages equally of someone who has this great ability to write wonderful storytelling in words. So I hope that helps as well.
That does. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, I'm sorry if you had a burning question you didn't get a chance to answer, but I do want to thank Fatima for your time, your energy, your creativity, and your knowledge being willing to share. And I also want to thank all of you for participating and engaging. Wonderful. I learned when you ask questions, so I appreciate that as well. And then remember, this is something that you will write about. So I hope that you took in some notes, or after class, write some reflections, and you'll write a 150-word reflection on our conversation today. Just what you thought, what you learned, what you wanted to learn, what you agree, what you didn't agree with, in 150 words. And that is available in Blackboard. So I look forward to seeing that as well. And if you have any questions, you can reach out. I believe that's due in a couple of days. So I will follow up in Slack with specifics and due dates. Thank you so much for your time, Fatima. I appreciate
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, everybody, for the questions. Thank you.
Yes. Right. Everyone, have a good day. Enjoy your day.
Thank you so much.
Have a good day, Professor.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Professor, could you read my email?
I thought I responded to all emails.
You did. I sent you another one. I just wanted to let you know that I sent you another one.
Okay. Oh, yes. Yes, I will. I'll
Okay.
let you know as soon as I get off.
Okay. Thank you. You have a good one.
You too.
Talk to you later.
All right.